Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving headfirst into one of the most fascinating mysteries out there, the human mind. We're going to decode exactly how psychologists act as, well, ultimate detectives. They're out there measuring the invisible architecture of how we think and feel. We're looking deeply at the science, the art, and the methodology of personality assessment. So if you've ever wondered how professionals actually figure out how someone copes and relates to the world, you are absolutely in the right place. Here's our game plan for today. We'll start by exploring why this is more than just testing. Walk through the 9-step assessment process, check out the tools of the trade, see how they go about making sense of the data, tackle flaws, fakes, and ethics, and wrap it all up with the golden rule of assessment. All right, let's jump straight into section 1, more than just testing.
Now, when most people hear the phrase personality assessment, they immediately picture a test, right? Like sitting at a desk, filling out a bubble sheet, or staring at an ink blot. But that is actually just personality testing, a single, isolated instrument. Personality assessment, on the other hand, is a broad, comprehensive investigation. It takes those standalone tests and integrates them with in-depth interviews, behavioral observations, case histories, and a lot of clinical judgment. Basically, a test is just one single clue, whereas the assessment is the entire investigation.
So formally speaking, it's a systematic process designed to understand the whole person. Unlike, say, an intelligence test that's just looking at your cognitive ability, personality assessment evaluates your enduring psychological characteristics. Modern assessment actually relies on mixing multiple theoretical models to pull this off. They might use trait theories to map out your day-to-day behavior, and then use psychodynamic clues to uncover the unconscious motives driving those behaviors. It pulls all these insights together to paint a complete, rich picture of an individual's adjustment and coping mechanisms. Moving right along to section 2, the 9-step assessment process.
Real psychologists actually follow a highly structured method to gather their clues. The whole investigation follows a strict methodology that chunks into 5 macro phases. It all hinges entirely on phase 1, the referral question. Essentially, why are we here? Are we assessing a kid for a learning disability, or are we screening a police officer? That one single question dictates phase 2, which is selecting the exact methods based on that client's context. Phase 3 is the actual administration and observation. And finally, phases 4 and 5 are where the real detective work pays off. That's interpreting the data and integrating it into a comprehensive report. Every single step relies heavily on the one right before it to solve the puzzle.
Let's open up the toolkit in section 3, tools of the trade. So here we have the 4 major categories of tools. The top 2, the clinical interview and behavioral observation, are totally foundational. The interview allows the psychologist to directly explore emotional experiences. But behavioral observation, that brings incredible depth. Honestly, sometimes the most valuable data isn't the answer a client gives, but how long they hesitate before answering. Or maybe they completely avoid eye contact when talking about a specific family member. You know? That kind of vital context could literally never be captured by a test score alone. When it comes to the testing instruments themselves, they generally fall into 2 distinct camps. You've got objective tests, like the famous MMPI, which rely on structured items and standard mathematical scoring. These measure psychopathology and symptoms with absolute precision. Then you have projective tests. These are born out of psychodynamic theory, and they use ambiguous stimuli. Think the Rorschach ink blot or the TAT. Because the image is entirely open to interpretation, the assumption is that the client is going to project their own hidden unconscious motives and conflicts right onto it. This yields incredibly rich qualitative data. Which brings us to section 4, making sense of the data. Look, gathering all these clues is totally useless unless you actually know how to connect them logically. And that brings us to case formulation. When psychologists interpret findings, they aren't just reporting numbers or just slapping a diagnostic label on someone. A formulation is essentially a working hypothesis about the person's psychological reality. It weaves all the clues together into an integrated explanation, completely transforming the process from simple data collection into clinical storytelling. It explains exactly why this individual is experiencing their current difficulties. Now, here is a truly mind-bending reality of this field. Personality itself cannot be observed directly. You literally can't put a personality under a microscope. You can't weigh it on a scale. Because it's invisible, psychologists can only observe the outputs, like the behaviors, the test scores, the personal narratives, and from those observable outputs, they have to carefully and scientifically infer the underlying personality characteristics. This means all personality assessment absolutely requires highly skilled clinical interpretation. Let's shift gears a bit for section 5, flaws, fakes, and ethics.
Because this whole process relies so heavily on inference, it's definitely not immune to vulnerabilities. So you might be wondering, what if the person taking the test is just lying? In the assessment world, this is known as response bias. And it's a massive factor because individuals can and do distort their responses, whether intentionally or unintentionally. Let's look at how this actually manifests.
The first type of response bias is social desirability. Now, this isn't always a deliberate lie. A lot of times it's just an unconscious defense mechanism. We all naturally want to look well-adjusted and be perceived favorably by others, right? So clients might answer questions in a way that aligns with socially acceptable norms, rather than giving their unvarnished reality. On the flip side of that, we have faking bad. This is when an individual actively exaggerates their psychological problems or symptoms. Why on earth would someone do this? Well, it's often tied to external incentives. Maybe they're seeking disability benefits or attempting to avoid legal responsibility in a forensic setting. The professional has to constantly be on the lookout for data that just seems way too extreme or inconsistent. And then there is faking good. Now, while social desirability is about wanting to look good in a general, sort of unconscious way, faking good is usually a very specific, active attempt to conceal genuine psychological difficulties. This might pop up when someone is trying to gain child custody or secure a really high-stakes job. Psychologists have to account for every single one of these biases when formulating their interpretations.
Beyond just navigating test-taking flaws, practitioners hold some massive ethical responsibilities. They absolutely have to obtain informed consent, maintain strict confidentiality, and interpret the data with a ton of cultural nuance. A specific trait or behavior can mean something completely different depending on a person's background or environment. Psychologists also have to be hyper-aware of their own biases, especially with subjective tools like those ink blots. Ultimately, the goal of any assessment is to support psychological growth, never to stigmatize someone or reduce an incredibly complex human being to just a set of test scores.
And finally, we arrive at Section 6, the golden rule of assessment.
All right, if you remember absolutely nothing else from this explainer today, it needs to be these 6 things. Number 1, assessment is about understanding how the whole person thinks, feels, and copes. Number 2, assessment is not just testing. Testing is just one tiny part of the process. Number 3, that process is a strict sequence, from the initial referral question all the way to the integrated report. Number 4, the major methods are interviews, observations, objective tests, and projective tests. Number 5, the heavy hitters are the MNPI for objective and the Rorschach and TAT for projective, which leaves us with point number 6. The golden rule of assessment. The contemporary view of this field absolutely demands a multi-method approach. As the quote goes, no single test is enough. Personality assessment requires integration of multiple sources of information and clinical judgment. You simply cannot understand the breathtaking complexity of a human being with a single questionnaire. So, the next time someone tries to summarize their entire identity with a neat little 4-letter personality type or a single test score, ask yourself, are we actually honoring the true invisible complexity of the human mind, or are we just looking at one piece of a 1,000-piece puzzle?